In the suffocating darkness of a Taliban stronghold, 4 Navy SEALs lay bleeding in a bombed-out compound, their radio dead, ammunition nearly gone, and enemy fighters closing in from all sides. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen pressed his back against crumbling concrete, watching his brothers in arms fade with each labored breath. Above them, the distinctive rumble of an A-10 Warthog's twin engines cut through the night like a promise of salvation, or a harbinger of their own destruction. Because sometimes, the only way to save lives is to risk everything, including the very souls you're trying to rescue. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen dragged Petty Officer Second Class Jake Rodriguez behind what remained of a concrete wall, leaving. A crimson streak across the dusty floor. Rodriguez's left leg hung at an unnatural angle, shattered by shrapnel from the IED that had turned their extraction into a nightmare. "Stay with me, Jake," Chen whispered, his voice barely audible over the sporadic gunfire echoing through the abandoned building. "Medevac's coming." But they both knew it was a lie. 20 meters away, Petty Officer First Class David Ghost Morrison crouched behind an overturned table, his M4 trained on the doorway where muzzle flashes had been appearing with increasing frequency. His normally steady hands trembled slightly as he changed magazines, his second to last. "Chen," Morrison's voice cracked through the darkness. "We got movement on the north side, at least 8 tangos, maybe more." The 4th member of their team, Chief Petty Officer Sam "Bull" Thompson, pressed himself against the eastern wall, his massive frame barely concealed by the shadows. Blood seeped through his tactical vest, where an AK round had found its mark 2 hours ago. He'd been moving slower ever since, though he'd never admit it. "Radio's still dead," Thompson reported, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Last transmission. I got through was our position to TOC. That was 40 minutes ago." Chen closed his eyes for a moment, running through their options. They were trapped in a 3-story compound in the Helmand province, surrounded by Taliban fighters who'd been expecting them. The mission, capture or kill a high-value target named Zahir Shah, had gone sideways the moment they'd breached the building. Shah wasn't here. Instead, they'd walked into a carefully orchestrated trap. "How many rounds you got left?" Chen asked Morrison. 37, came the immediate reply. Morrison always kept count. "Bull?" 42. Chen checked his own weapon. 51. He looked down at Rodriguez, whose eyes had gone glassy with pain and blood loss. "Jake?" 2, maybe 3 magazines, Rodriguez managed through gritted teeth. "But I can't feel my legs, Sarge." The math was simple and brutal. 4 operators, less than 150 rounds between them, facing an unknown number of enemy combatants in unfamiliar terrain with no communication and no backup. Chen had been in bad situations before, but this felt different. Final. A voice echoed from somewhere beyond the northern wall. Pashto, urgent and commanding. Chen didn't need a translator to understand the tone. They were organizing for a final. "Push! They're massing for an assault," Morrison reported, shifting his position slightly to get a better angle on the doorway. "I count at least 12 distinct voices." Thompson spat blood onto the floor. "Well, ain't this a clusterfuck?" Chen pulled out his GPS unit, checking their coordinates one more time. Grid reference 41R QR 112345678890. He'd memorized it, just like he'd memorized the faces of his wife, Sarah, and their twin daughters back in Virginia Beach. The girls would be starting 2nd grade next month. Sarah had made him promise to be back for their first day. Another burst of automatic fire erupted from the western approach, bullets chewing through the concrete wall above their heads. Dust and debris rained down, coating them in a fine layer of pulverized building. "They're probing," Chen observed. "Testing our response time and fields of fire." "Smart," Morrison agreed. "These aren't farm boys with surplus rifles. Somebody trained these guys." Rodriguez tried to sit up straighter against the wall, wincing with the effort. "Sarge, you need to leave me. Take the others and—" "Shut the fuck up, Jake," Chen cut him off. "We all go home, or none of us do. That's not changing." "But I said shut up." Chen's voice carried the authority of 8 years leading men in combat. "You think I'm gonna face your mom at the funeral and tell her I left her boy behind? Not happening." The familiar whine of an incoming mortar round made them all instinctively duck. The explosion came from the courtyard outside, close enough to rattle what was left of the windows. Smoke and dust billowed through the openings. "Ranging shot," Thompson called out. "Next one's gonna be on target." Chen's mind raced through their tactical situation. The compound was a typical Afghan structure. 3 stories of reinforced concrete and steel, designed more for defense than comfort. They'd entered through the main courtyard, following intel that placed Zahir Shah in the western wing. Instead, they'd found evidence of a hasty evacuation, warm tea glasses, cigarettes still burning in ashtrays, and most tellingly, freshly oiled weapons left behind as bait. The trap had been expertly laid. Motion sensors hidden in the outer walls had likely alerted the Taliban to their approach. By the time Chen's team had realized the building was empty of high-value targets, fighters had emerged from concealed positions in the surrounding buildings, cutting off their escape routes with overlapping fields of fire. The IED that had shattered Rodriguez's leg had been positioned perfectly, close enough to cause casualties, but not close enough to kill them all instantly. Someone wanted them alive. At least temporarily. That meant cameras, propaganda videos, and a very public execution designed to send a message to other American forces in the region. Another voice called out in Pashto, followed by what sounded like laughter. Chen felt his jaw tighten. "These bastards were enjoying themselves. Movement on the south wall," Morrison reported. "I see at least 4 figures in the shadows. They're flanking us." Acknowledged. Chen checked his watch. 0247 hours. Dawn was still 3 hours away, which meant 3 more hours of darkness for the enemy to maneuver. But it also meant 3 more hours until close air support would be most effective, if it came at all. The mission had been classified as low risk, conducted under radio silence to avoid compromising ongoing operations in the area. Standard operating procedure called for teams to check in every 4 hours unless they made contact with enemy forces. Chen's last successful transmission had been at 2100 hours, reporting their infiltration of the target area. By now, someone at Tactical Operations Center would be getting nervous. In another hour, they'd start making calls. In 2 hours, they might scramble a quick reaction force. But even if everything went perfectly, help wouldn't arrive until after sunrise, assuming the brass could locate them in time. Chen pulled out his phone, checking for any signal bars. Nothing. The Taliban were notorious for their use of signal jammers, purchased on the black market from Chinese and Russian sources. They'd learned to isolate and eliminate American forces by cutting off their technological advantages. A burst of automatic fire from the eastern wall made Thompson curse and return fire. The muzzle flash from his M4 briefly illuminated his face, revealing the grim determination Chen had come to know over 3 deployments together. 2 tangos on the balcony, Thompson reported. "I got one, maybe both." "Save your ammo," Chen ordered. "Only take shots you're sure of." Rodriguez tried to apply pressure to his wounded leg, his face contorting with pain. "Sarge, what if we surrender?" The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of men moving through the building below them. Chen knew what they were all thinking. The same thing he was thinking. Surrender wasn't an option. Not for American Special Operations Forces, and especially not for men who'd spent years hunting the very people who now had them surrounded. The Taliban's treatment of captured Americans was well documented and uniformly brutal. Videos of beheadings, torture sessions, and elaborate execution ceremonies had become recruiting tools for jihadist organizations across the Middle East. Surrendering would only guarantee a slower, more public death. "We fight," Chen said simply, "until we can't fight anymore." Morrison nodded from his position by the doorway. "Roger that." Thompson spat more blood onto the floor. "Hoo-ah!" Rodriguez closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the wall. "My wife, she's pregnant. Due in December." "Boy or girl?" Chen asked, trying to keep Rodriguez focused on something positive. "Don't know yet. She wants it to be a surprise." Rodriguez managed a weak smile. "I was going to teach him to play baseball. Or her. Sarah, that's my wife. She says girls can play baseball too." "They can," Chen agreed. "My daughters play softball. Katie's got a hell of an arm." A new sound reached them from outside. The distinctive rumble of diesel engines. Vehicles, multiple vehicles, moving slowly through the streets surrounding the compound. Chen felt his stomach drop. "Reinforcements. You hear that?" Morrison whispered. "Yeah." Chen checked his weapon again, making sure a round was chambered. "Sounds like the party's about to get bigger." The engine stopped somewhere close by, followed by the slam of vehicle doors and urgent voices speaking in rapid Pashto. Chen counted. At least 6 distinct voices, probably more. The tactical situation had just gone from bad to impossible. Thompson shifted his weight, grimacing with. Captain Sarah Reaper Mitchell pulled back on the stick of her A-10 Thunderbolt II, the twin General Electric TF-34 engines roaring as she climbed away from her first strafing run. Below her, the compound erupted in a cascade of concrete dust and debris, the distinctive brrrr-t of her GAU-8 Avenger cannon still echoing across the Helmand Valley. "Hog 2-3, good hits on target," came the voice of her wingman, Captain Tom Sledge Rodriguez, flying 2,000 feet off her right wing. Multiple secondary explosions. Building structure is compromised but still standing. Sarah banked hard left, her eyes scanning the thermal imaging display mounted on her instrument panel. 4 heat signatures had been visible in the northeast corner of the building before her attack. 4 American souls who had requested their own death rather than face capture and torture at the hands of the Taliban. Now there were 7 signatures, visible through the smoke and dust. 3 new ones, moving with purpose through the rubble. "Guardian 2-1, this is Hog 2-3, Sarah radioed to the Apache helicopter circling at a safer altitude. "I show survivors in the target building. Multiple heat signatures, northeast corner, top floor." "Copy, Hog 2-3. Can you confirm identity?" Sarah adjusted her targeting pod, zooming in on the building. The concrete structure had partially collapsed on the eastern side, but the northwest corner where she'd focused her cannon fire remained largely intact. Through the thermal imaging, she could see movement, people helping other people, the unmistakable actions of soldiers rendering aid to wounded comrades. "Guardian 2-1, I'm seeing what appears to be casualty recovery operations. These might be our boys." Her radio crackled with the voice she'd been dreading to hear again. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, somehow still alive after requesting an airstrike on his own position. His transmission was weak and broken by static, but unmistakably American. "Hog Flight, this is Reaper 6. Still breathing down here. 4 souls still on board." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. In 8 years of flying close air support, missions, she'd never had friendly forces request fire on their own position. The balls it took to make that call, the absolute desperation required to choose death by American weapons over capture by the enemy, it defied every instinct she had as both a pilot and a human being. But somehow, impossibly, they'd survived. "Reaper 6, this is Hog 2-3, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the emotions churning in her chest. "Sit rep on your status over. Hog 2-3, building partially collapsed. We're trapped in the northeast section. Thompson is critical. Rodriguez is unconscious but breathing. We've got maybe 30 minutes before this whole structure comes down." Sarah looked at her fuel gauge. 28 minutes of loiter time remaining before she'd have to break off for aerial refueling. Sledge would have similar numbers. The Apache helicopters had better endurance, but their 30mm cannons lacked the precision needed for a delicate extraction operation in a partially collapsed building. Reaper 6, what's your tactical situation? Any remaining hostiles? A pause, filled with the sound of shifting concrete and distant voices speaking in Pashto. Then Chen's voice returned, strained but determined. Multiple enemy KIA from your gun run, but we're hearing movement in the lower floors. They're regrouping, probably planning another assault. Structure won't survive another engagement. Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her career. Guardian 2-1, this is Hog 2-3. I need immediate CSR coordination. Have Pedro flight spin up for casualty evacuation and get me a ground force to mark landing zones. Hog 2-3. Be advised, Pedro flight is 40 minutes out and nearest ground forces are at least 30 minutes from your location. Enemy situation is unknown but presumed significant. 40 minutes. Sarah looked at her fuel gauge again, then at the crumbling building below. The laws of physics were unforgiving. Fuel consumption, structural engineering, and Taliban tactics. Didn't care about American lives or her desire to save them. But sometimes the laws of physics had to negotiate with the stubborn determination of a United States Air Force pilot. Sledge, she called to her wingman. What's your fuel state? 26 minutes playtime, Rodriguez replied. Same problem you're thinking about. Reaper 6, Sarah radioed to the trapped SEALs. I need you to give me exact coordinates on any remaining hostile positions. We're going to clear you a path to the roof. Hog 2-3, negative on roof access. Stairwell collapsed in your gun run. We're effectively sealed in up here. Sarah cursed under her breath. The A-10's 30mm cannon was devastating against enemy personnel and light vehicles, but it was also brutally indiscriminate. Her attempt to level the building had created as many problems as it had solved. Through her headset, she heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors growing louder. The Apache helicopters were moving into a lower orbit, their crews undoubtedly frustrated by their inability to provide direct assistance. Guardian 2-1, Guardian 2-2, this is Hog 2-3. I need you to establish a low-orbit pattern. Around the target building, use your thermal imaging to identify any ground-level threats while I work the close-in problems. Roger, Hog 2-3. Be advised, we're showing multiple heat signatures in buildings surrounding your target. Estimate 20 to 30 potential hostiles in concealed positions. 20 to 30. Sarah's mind raced through the tactical mathematics. Even if she could precisely engage every target, she'd run out of ammunition long before eliminating all threats. The A-10 carried 1,174 rounds of 30mm ammunition. Devastating firepower, but not infinite. More importantly, time was running out for the trapped SEALs. Chen had estimated 30 minutes before the building collapsed completely, and that had been 5 minutes ago. Reaper 6, Sarah transmitted. I need you to describe your exact position within the building. How much structural damage can you see? Chen's reply was interrupted by the sound of automatic weapons fire, muffled by concrete and debris. When his voice returned, it carried the controlled urgency of a professional soldier under fire. Taking fire from below. They're shooting up through the floor. We've moved to the northwest corner. Ceiling has multiple stress fractures. I'd estimate 15 to 20 minutes before catastrophic collapse. 15 minutes. Sarah's fuel gauge showed 23 minutes remaining. She could stay on station for the full duration, but that would leave her dangerously low on fuel for the flight back to base. If she encountered any mechanical problems or adverse weather, the decision was no decision at all. Sledge, she called. To her wingman, I need you to RTB and get gas. Bring back whatever ordnance they can hang on your aircraft. Sarah, you can't stay here alone, not with 30-plus hostiles and no ground support. I'm not leaving those boys. Then I'm not leaving you. Sarah smiled grimly at her wingman's loyalty, but the tactical situation was clear. Tom, one of us needs to get back with more bullets. I'm senior aircraft commander, so I'm making the call. Get your ass back to base and come back loaded for bear. A long pause, then Rodriguez's resigned voice. Roger, Hog 24 RTB for rearm and refuel. I'll be back in 90 minutes. Copy. Try to bring friends. Sarah watched her wingman's navigation lights disappear into the darkness, leaving her alone over hostile territory with a fuel gauge ticking steadily downward and 4 American lives. Hanging in the balance. The Apache helicopters were maintaining their orbit, but Sarah could hear the frustration in the pilots' voices as they reported movement around the target building. The Taliban fighters had learned to stay under cover, using the surrounding buildings and terrain to mask their positions from aerial observation. Guardian 2-1, this is Hog 2-3. What's your assessment on enemy positions? Hog 2-3. We're tracking multiple groups of 3 to 4 individuals moving between buildings approximately 200 meters from your target. They appear to be positioning for another assault. Sarah pulled up her digital map display, overlaying the Apache's targeting data with her own navigation system. The Taliban weren't just regrouping. They were maneuvering with tactical sophistication, using covered approaches and coordinated movement that suggested professional military training. Commander Rashid, the voice that had taunted Chen over the radio, was proving to be more than just another Taliban cell leader. This was someone with genuine military experience, possibly former Afghan National Army or even foreign trained. Reaper 6, Sarah transmitted. I need you to give me a detailed description of the structural damage around your position. Can you access any other part of the building? Chen's reply came through bursts of static and the sound of shifting concrete. Negative. Eastern wall completely collapsed. Southern approach blocked by debris. Western approach leads to stairwell. But that's where the hostiles are positioned. We're effectively trapped in about a 20 by 20 space. Sarah did the mental calculation. 4 wounded men in a 400-square-foot area, 3 stories above ground level, with no viable escape routes and diminishing structural integrity. Even if she could eliminate every Taliban fighter in the area, getting the SEALs out would require a precision helicopter operation in a damaged building that might collapse at any moment. The sound of diesel engines reached her through the aircraft's Major David Phoenix Kowalski banked his Apache AH-64D longbow hard left, the twin General Electric T-700 engines screaming as he pulled maximum Gs to avoid the stream of tracer fire reaching up from the compound below. His co-pilot and gunner, Chief Warrant Officer Lisa Viper Santos, worked frantically at her targeting systems in the front seat. Phoenix, I've got multiple muzzle flashes from the western building complex, Santos reported, her voice steady despite the aircraft shaking from nearby explosions. Estimate 6 to 8 fighters with small arms and at least 2 crew served. Weapons! Kowalski watched his heads-up display as Hog 2-3, Captain Sarah Mitchell's A-10, screamed past his aircraft at an altitude that made his teeth clench. The woman was flying her Warthog like a fighter jet, pulling maneuvers that should have been impossible for an aircraft designed for ground attack. Guardian 2-2? This is Guardian 2-1, Kowalski radioed to his wingman, Captain Mark Reaper Johnson. Take position 300 meters north of the target building. I need overlapping fields of fire on all approaches. Guardian 2-1. 2-2 is in position. I show multiple heat signatures converging on the target from all directions. Looks like they're massing for a final assault. Through his helmet-mounted display, Kowalski could see the thermal signatures of Taliban fighters moving with tactical precision through the rubble-strewn streets around the compound. Commander Rashid, whoever he was, had turned what should have been a simple capture-or-kill operation into a sophisticated urban warfare scenario. Viper, what's our ammunition status? Kowalski asked his gunner. 200 rounds of 30 Mike, 16 Hellfire missiles, and 38 rockets, Santos replied, plus the usual load of small arms for personal defense. Enough firepower to level city blocks, but Kowalski couldn't use most of it. The trapped SEALs were danger close to every potential target, and the building they were trapped in was so structurally compromised that a single Hellfire missile would bring the entire structure down on top of them. The radio crackled with Sarah. Mitchell's voice, calm and professional despite the impossibility of what she was proposing. Guardian 2-1, I need you to move to a position directly over the target building and establish a hover. Kowalski felt his stomach drop as he realized what the A-10 pilot was planning. Hog 2-3, what are you planning? I'm going to use your rotor wash to clear debris from the roof and create a landing zone. Ma'am, Apache helicopters cannot conduct casualty evacuation. We don't have the internal space or medical equipment. I know. That's why I'm going to land my A-10 on the roof. Kowalski stared at his instruments, trying to process what he'd just heard. An A-10 Thunderbolt II weighed over 29,000 pounds, fully loaded. The damaged concrete building below them had been weakened by cannon fire, explosions, and structural stress. Even if Mitchell could somehow manage to land her aircraft on the roof, which violated every principle of aerodynamics and structural engineering he knew, the building would collapse the moment her landing gear touched down. Hog 2-3, the A-10 was not designed for rooftop landings. The building structure cannot support the aircraft's weight. Even if you could land safely, there would be no way to take off again. Copy that, Mitchell replied with the matter-of-fact tone of someone ordering coffee. Sometimes you have to leave your aircraft behind. Kowalski looked down at the target building. Its northeastern corner partially collapsed from Mitchell's earlier gun runs, debris scattered across what had once been a flat rooftop. The mathematics were clear. This was suicide. Mitchell would die in the crash, the SEALs would die in the resulting collapse, and he'd have to watch it all happen from 300 feet above. Unless... Guardian 2-2. This is 2-1. Kowalski radioed to his wingman. I need you to establish high cover and engage any enemy positions that threaten the target building. Priority targets are RPG teams and crew-served weapons. Guardian 2-1, are we supporting this landing attempt? Kowalski made a decision that would either save 4 lives or cost 6. Affirmative. We're supporting. He pushed his cyclic forward and began descending toward the target building, his Apache's rotor wash already creating a maelstrom of dust and debris below. At 200 feet above the structure, he brought his helicopter into a hover, the twin T-700 engines straining to maintain position in the turbulent air created by the building's thermal signature. Viper, I need continuous thermal imaging on the roof, Kowalski ordered. Any structural changes, any signs of collapse, you call it immediately. Roger, Santos replied, her fingers dancing across her targeting controls. Thermal shows the roof surface is clear of major debris, but I can see stress fractures in the concrete. This building is maybe minutes away from catastrophic failure. Through his night vision system, Kowalski watched Mitchell's A-10 line up for her approach. The aircraft looked massive against the backdrop of the small building, its 40-foot wingspan barely fitting between the surrounding structures. Mitchell was approaching from the east, using what remained of the building's longest axis for her landing roll. Hog 2-3, Guardian 2-1, Kowalski transmitted. Rotor wash is clearing the roof, but I'm seeing significant structural damage. Multiple stress fractures, possible rebar exposure on the northern edge. Roger that. I'm committed to landing. Kowalski watched in fascination and horror as Mitchell began her final approach. She was flying the A-10 like a transport aircraft, gear down, flaps extended, approach speed reduced to just above stall velocity. The twin engines were barely whispering, their thrust reduced to minimum sustainable power. It was beautiful and terrifying and completely insane. Guardian 2-1, this is Reaper 6, came Staff Sergeant Chen's voice through the radio static. We can feel the building shaking from your rotor wash. Structure is failing rapidly. Reaper 6, stand by. Cavalry's coming, at 100 feet. Above the building, Mitchell's approach looked almost normal. At 50 feet, Kowalski could see that her aircraft was descending too fast, the angle of attack too steep for a conventional landing. At 20 feet, he realized she wasn't attempting a landing at all. She was attempting a controlled crash. The A-10's main landing gear touched the roof with an impact that sent shockwaves through the entire building. Concrete dust erupted around the aircraft as the structure absorbed the massive weight and kinetic energy. For a moment, it seemed like the building might hold. Then the roof began to sag. "Phoenix!" Santos called out urgently. "I'm seeing catastrophic structural failure. The entire northeastern section is collapsing." Kowalski watched his thermal display as heat signatures, Mitchell and the 4 SEALs, disappeared into a cloud of dust and debris as that section of the building pancaked downward. "Guardian 2-2, I've lost visual on all personnel," Kowalski reported to his wingman. "Building collapse in progress." But even as he spoke, he could see movement in his thermal imaging. Heat signatures were shifting, moving with purpose despite the chaos of the collapse. Someone was still alive down there, and they were trying to dig their way out. "Guardian 2-1, this is Pedro 2-6, came a new voice over the radio. The combat search and rescue helicopters had finally arrived. "We're inbound to your location, ETA 15 minutes. What's the situation?" 15 minutes. Kowalski looked at his fuel gauge and ammunition counter. He had enough fuel for 20 minutes of hover time and enough ammunition to hold off the Taliban forces still maneuvering around the compound. But 15 minutes was an eternity in combat, especially with American personnel trapped under tons of concrete and steel. "Pedro 2-6, Guardian 2-1. We have 5 American personnel trapped in a partially collapsed building, multiple enemy forces in the immediate area. I need immediate medical evacuation capabilities and heavy lifting equipment. Guardian 2-1, Pedro flight is equipped for standard CSAR operations. We don't have heavy construction equipment." Kowalski looked down at the pile of rubble that had been the target building. Standard search and rescue operations involved extracting personnel from aircraft wreckage or picking up wounded soldiers from relatively clear landing zones. This was an urban disaster recovery operation requiring bulldozers and construction cranes. "Viper, what are you seeing on thermal?" Santos adjusted her sensors, trying to penetrate the concrete and steel debris field below. "I'm getting intermittent heat signatures from what appears to be a void space in the northeastern section. Looks like part of the building structure created a protective pocket when it collapsed." "How big?" "Maybe 10 feet by 15 feet. Roughly triangular shape. If our people are in there, they're alive but completely buried." Kowalski felt a grim smile cross his face. The A-10's titanium armored cockpit had probably acted like a protective shell when the building collapsed, creating exactly the kind of void space Santos was describing. Mitchell's insane landing might have actually worked, not as intended, but as an accidental survival shelter. "Guardian 2-2, this is 2-1, Kowalski radioed to his wingman. "I need you to establish a defensive perimeter around the target building. Anything that moves within 200 meters gets your personal attention. Guardian 2-1, I copy. Defensive perimeter established. Be advised, I'm tracking multiple vehicle signatures approaching from the northwest. Master Chief Construction Electrician Jake Bulldozer." Romano felt the D7 bulldozer's tracks bite into the loose gravel as he approached the collapse site, the massive diesel engine roaring at full throttle. Behind him, his CB Construction team followed in their own heavy equipment. Another bulldozer operated by Petty Officer First Class Maria Santos and a crane truck driven by Senior Chief Bobby Wrecker Thompson. They'd been working on a forward operating base expansion 12, click southeast when they'd monitored the radio traffic about trapped American personnel. Romano had made the decision to respond without waiting for official orders. Sometimes you had to choose between doing what was right and doing what was authorized. "Bulldozer 6-7, this is Pedro 2-6, came the voice of the combat search and rescue commander. "We have a security perimeter established around the target building. Be advised, there are still active hostiles in the area, and we just lost our air cover." Romano had heard Guardian 2-1's final transmission as Major Kowalski's Apache had gone down somewhere in the darkness beyond the compound. Another American air crew down in hostile territory, another impossible situation that required immediate response. But first things first, 5 people were trapped under tons of concrete and steel, and time was running out. Pedro 2-6, this is Bulldozer 6-7, Romano replied through his helmet microphone. We're approaching from the southeast. What's the tactical situation? Bulldozer, we have sporadic contact with small groups of enemy fighters, but no organized resistance since Guardian Flight neutralized their heavy weapons. Our primary concern is structural instability of the collapse site. Romano could see the target building, or what was left of it, in his bulldozer's headlights. The 3-story structure had pancaked down to roughly half its original height, with the northeastern section completely collapsed into a pile of concrete slabs, twisted rebar, and assorted building materials. Somewhere under that debris, 5 American warriors were fighting for their lives in a space no larger than a small closet. Santos, Thompson, Romano called to his team on their internal frequency. What's your assessment of the collapse pattern? Petty Officer Santos, who'd been a structural engineer before joining the Navy, studied the debris field through her bulldozer's reinforced windscreen. Chief, it looks like a progressive collapse starting from the northeast corner. The A-10's impact probably compromised the primary support columns, and the subsequent explosions finished the job. Can we get in there without causing secondary collapses? Senior Chief Thompson, operating the crane truck, maneuvered his vehicle into position near the debris pile. We'll have to be surgical about it. Remove debris systematically, maintain structural support wherever possible. It's going to be slow work. Slow work. Romano looked at his watch. 0347 hours. The trapped personnel had been under that debris for nearly 20 minutes. In confined space rescue operations, time was always the enemy. Carbon dioxide buildup, oxygen, depletion, crush injuries, and psychological stress all worked against survival. Pedro 2-6, this is Bulldozer 6-7. We're beginning debris removal operations. I need your security teams to establish a wider perimeter. This is going to take some time, and we'll be vulnerable while we work. Roger that, Bulldozer. Pedro 2-3 and 2-4 are establishing overwatch positions on the surrounding buildings. Romano engaged his bulldozer's blade and approached the debris pile carefully, using minimal hydraulic pressure to avoid sudden impacts that might cause further collapses. The D7's blade scraped against concrete as he began pushing away the loose material on the surface. Broken chunks of masonry, twisted pieces of rebar, fragments of the building's interior. Reaper 6, this is Bulldozer 6-7, Romano radioed to the trapped personnel. We're starting excavation. Can you give me any landmarks to help us locate your position? Staff Sergeant Chen's voice came through the radio static, weak but determined. Bulldozer 6-7, we're in what remains of the aircraft cockpit, approximately 15 feet from the northeast corner of the building, maybe 10 feet below the surface level. 15 feet from the northeast corner, 10 feet down. Romano studied the debris field, trying to estimate where that would place the trapped Americans. The mathematics were complicated by the irregular collapse pattern and the unknown orientation of the aircraft after impact. Santos, Romano called to his teammate, I need you to work the western edge of the debris pile. Clear a path toward the center, but don't disturb anything that looks like it might be load-bearing. Roger, Chief. Moving to position. Romano watched. As Santos maneuvered her bulldozer into position, her movements precise and controlled. Maria Santos had been working construction for 15 years before joining the Seabees, and her experience showed in every decision she made. The sound of her blade scraping against concrete mixed with the rumble of diesel engines and the distant chatter of radio communications from the security teams. Romano could hear the Pedro crews calling out movement in the surrounding buildings. Scattered Taliban fighters still operating in the area, probably trying to determine if they should attack the rescue operation or withdraw to fight another day. Thompson, what's your assessment on crane capabilities? Romano asked. I can lift about 20 tons at maximum extension. Senior Chief Thompson replied from his crane truck. Problem is, most of these concrete slabs are irregularly shaped and don't have obvious attachment points. I'll need to get rigging cables under them somehow. 20 tons. Romano estimated that some of the larger concrete slabs weighed close to that limit, and they'd need to remove at least 6 or 7 major pieces to reach the trapped personnel. Chief, Santos called over the radio, I'm seeing something interesting about 15 feet from the northeast corner. Looks like part of the aircraft structure is visible under this concrete slab. Romano maneuvered his bulldozer closer to Santos's position, using his headlights to examine what she'd uncovered. A piece of dark metal was visible beneath a massive concrete slab, possibly part of the A-10's wing or fuselage structure. That might be our target, Romano decided. Thompson, can you get rigging cables under that slab? I can try, Chief. Give me some room to work. Romano backed his bulldozer away as Senior Chief Thompson positioned his crane truck for maximum lifting capacity. The boom extended with a hydraulic whine, and Thompson began the delicate process of threading steel cables under the concrete slab. Pedro 26, this is Bulldozer 67, Romano radioed. We may have located our personnel, beginning heavy lifting operations. Bulldozer 67, be advised we're tracking multiple individuals approaching from the west. Estimate, 6 to 8 personnel, approximately 400 meters out. More Taliban fighters. Romano looked at his watch. They'd been working for 15 minutes and had barely scratched the surface of the debris pile. At this rate, it would take another hour to reach the trapped Americans, assuming the structure remained stable and enemy forces didn't interfere. Pedro, can you interdict those individuals before they reach effective weapons range? Bulldozer, Pedro 24 is moving to intercept. We'll try to discourage their approach. Through his headset, Romano could hear the sound of helicopter rotors as one of the Pavehawks moved to engage the approaching enemy fighters. The distinctive chatter of door-mounted machine guns echoed across the compound, followed by the heavier sound of enemy return fire. Contact! Contact! Came the urgent transmission from Pedro 24. We're taking effective fire from multiple positions. These guys have heavy machine guns and RPGs. Romano felt his jaw tighten. Professional soldiers again, not the typical Taliban fighters who usually scattered when confronted by American helicopters. Commander Rashid, whoever he was, had assembled a force capable of sustained operations against superior firepower. Thompson, how's that rigging coming? Romano asked urgently. Almost there, Chief. 2 more cables and I should be able to lift this slab. Santos, I need you to continue clearing the western approach. If we can get this slab removed, we might be able to see the aircraft directly. Romano returned his attention to the debris pile, using his bulldozer's blade to clear smaller pieces of concrete and steel while Thompson worked on the rigging cables. Every minute that passed increased the risk to the trapped personnel, not just from structural collapse, but from carbon dioxide poisoning in their confined space. Reaper 6, this is Bulldozer 67, Romano radioed. How are you holding up down there? Chen's response was noticeably weaker than before. Thompson is unconscious. Rodriguez is having trouble breathing. Captain Mitchell regained consciousness. Briefly, but passed out again. We're running out of air. Running out of air. Romano had feared this would happen. The improvised shelter created by the aircraft cockpit was small and poorly ventilated. With 5 people consuming oxygen in such a confined space, atmospheric conditions would deteriorate rapidly. Reaper 6, try to stay calm and breathe slowly. We're about to remove a major obstacle. Chief, rigging is complete, Thompson reported. I'm beginning the lift. Romano watched as the crane's cables grew taut, taking the weight of the massive concrete slab. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. 20 tons of reinforced concrete resisted the crane's hydraulic power. Then, slowly, Colonel James Reaper Sullivan sat in the sterile white hospital room at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, watching Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen sleep fitfully under the influence of morphine and exhaustion. Chen's wife, Sarah, sat beside the bed, holding her husband's hand while their twin daughters colored quietly in the corner chairs. It had been 72 hours since the rescue operation in Helmand Province. 72 hours since 5 American warriors had been pulled from the wreckage of what military historians were already calling the most audacious close air support mission in Air Force history. Sullivan had flown to Germany specifically to debrief the survivors and understand exactly what had happened in that compound. As the commanding officer of Joint Special Operations Command's Counterterrorism Task Force, he needed to know how a routine capture-or-kill mission had turned into an international incident that was dominating news cycles worldwide. "Colonel?" Chen's voice was hoarse but alert as he opened his eyes. "How long have I been out?" "About 16 hours, Sullivan replied, pulling his chair closer to the bed. "Your wife and daughters arrived yesterday. The doctors say you're going to make a full recovery." Chen looked over at his family, his eyes filling with tears he'd been too proud to shed in front of his teammates. I didn't think I'd ever see them again." Sarah Chen squeezed her husband's hand. "The girls want to know if you're still going to make it to their first day of school next week." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," Chen whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. Sullivan waited a moment for the family reunion to settle before beginning his questions. "Marcus, I need to understand what happened out there. The after-action reports are unusual." Chen shifted uncomfortably in his hospital bed. "Sir, we walked into a trap. Intelligence was wrong. Zahir Shah was never in that building. Someone leaked our operational details to Commander Rashid, and he used us as bait to draw in American air assets." "Tell me about Rashid." "Professional military training, sir. Possibly former Afghan National Army or foreign trained. He knew our tactics, our communication procedures, our standard responses to casualty situations. This wasn't some farmer with an AK-47. Sullivan nodded. The intelligence analysts were already working on identifying Commander Rashid, but preliminary reports suggested he might be a former Afghan Army colonel who joined the Taliban after the American withdrawal. If true, it meant the enemy now had access to someone who understood American military doctrine intimately. "What about Captain Mitchell's decision to land her aircraft on the building?" Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Sir, she saved our lives. We were dead, completely out of ammunition, building collapsing around us, 30-plus hostiles preparing a final assault. When she made that radio call requesting permission to level the building with us in it, I knew we were facing someone who understood the concept of acceptable losses. But she didn't level the building. No, sir. She landed her A-10 on the roof instead. Craziest goddamn thing I've ever seen, and I've been doing this for 8 years. Chen managed a weak smile. When the building collapsed around her aircraft, the cockpit armor created just enough void space to keep us alive until the Seabees could dig us out. Sullivan had read Captain Mitchell's preliminary debrief. The Air Force pilot had violated virtually every flight safety regulation in existence, but her actions had saved 5 lives. The military was struggling with how to handle her case, court-martial for reckless endangerment or Medal of Honor for heroism above and beyond the call of duty. "How's Chief Thompson?" Chen's expression grew somber. "Touch and go, sir. Internal bleeding was worse than we thought. Doctors say he's got maybe a 50-50 chance. If he makes it, he'll probably be medically retired." Thompson was in the intensive care unit 2 floors above them, fighting for his life with the same stubborn determination he'd shown in combat. His wife had flown in from Virginia Beach and was maintaining a constant vigil beside his bed. "Rodriguez? He's going to recover, but his legs. Doctors aren't sure if he'll walk normally again. He's more worried about missing his baby's birth than his own injuries." Sullivan had visited Rodriguez earlier that morning. The young petty officer's wife was due to give birth in 6 weeks, and all he could talk about was getting back to the States in time for the delivery. "Morrison? Concussion, some internal bruising, but he'll be fine. Already asking when he can." Return to duty. Chen paused. Sir, I need you to understand something about my team. Every one of these men performed above and beyond. When I told them we were going to die in that building, not one of them suggested surrender or tried to save himself. They were prepared to fight to the last round and die as Americans. Sullivan had interviewed Morrison the previous day and gotten a similar assessment. The young SEAL had nothing but praise for his team leader and teammates, crediting Chen's leadership with keeping them alive through an impossible situation. What about Major Kowalski and his crew? Guardian 2-1 stayed on station until his fuel was completely exhausted, Chen replied with obvious respect. He could have withdrawn when his wingman left for refueling, but he chose to provide overwatch. Protection until the rescue teams arrived. His Apache went down in a controlled crash about 2 clicks from our position. Sullivan had spoken with Kowalski at the Air Force Hospital in Ramstein. The Apache pilot had suffered 2 broken ribs and a concussion when his helicopter hit the ground, but both he and his gunner had survived the crash landing. They'd been recovered by a quick reaction force 6 hours later, having spent the night fighting off Taliban patrols in the desert. Marcus, Sullivan said carefully, I need to ask you about the decision to request airstrikes on your own position. Chen met his colonel's eyes directly. Sir, the tactical situation was hopeless. We had maybe 50 rounds of ammunition between 4 operators, facing 30-plus enemy combatants with RPGs and crew-served weapons. The building was structurally compromised and ready to collapse. We had no communication with higher headquarters, and no prospect of rescue. So you decided to take the enemy with you? Yes, sir. Better to die by American ordnance than be captured and tortured for propaganda videos. My team agreed unanimously. Sullivan understood the logic, even if it made him uncomfortable. Military doctrine acknowledged that there were situations where friendly fire on American positions might be necessary to prevent greater casualties or strategic losses, but actually making that decision, giving that order, it required a level of moral courage that few people possessed. The preliminary investigation suggests that your actions probably prevented a major Taliban propaganda victory, Sullivan said. Intelligence analysts believe Rashid was planning to capture your team alive and broadcast your executions to demonstrate that American Special Operations Forces could be defeated. Chen nodded grimly. We figured that was the plan, sir. Rashid made it pretty clear over the radio. Sullivan stood up and walked to the hospital room's window, looking out at the German countryside. The incident in Helmand province had already prompted major changes in operational security procedures and intelligence sharing protocols. But it had also demonstrated something more fundamental, that American military personnel would still choose death over dishonor, even in an age of asymmetric warfare and terrorist propaganda. Marcus, there's something else we need to discuss, Sullivan said, turning back to face Chen. The media attention. Chen grimaced. How bad is it? Captain Mitchell's landing is being called everything from the most heroic act in Air Force history to criminal negligence. The Taliban are claiming they shot down an American aircraft and killed dozens of coalition forces. Social media is full of conflicting reports and conspiracy theories. What's the official line? Routine counterterrorism operation, successful completion of mission objectives, minimal coalition casualties. Sullivan paused. The Pentagon doesn't want to acknowledge that we walked into a sophisticated trap or that we nearly lost an entire SEAL team to a Taliban commander with professional military training. Chen understood the political implications. Admitting that the enemy possessed that level of tactical sophistication would raise uncomfortable questions about intelligence failures and the overall effectiveness of American operations in Afghanistan. Sir, what about Captain Mitchell? She's being recommended for the Air Force Cross, Sullivan replied. The Medal of Honor was considered, but landing an aircraft in violation of direct orders creates legal complications. And the rest of us? Silver stars for you and Morrison. Bronze. Stars with V device for Thompson and Rodriguez. Your team's actions under fire were exemplary. even if the initial situation was compromised by intelligence failures. Chen was quiet for a moment, processing the information. Military decorations were important for career advancement and historical recognition, but they couldn't bring back the men who hadn't made it home from other operations. "Colonel, what happened to Commander Rashid?" Sullivan's expression grew grim. "He's gone. Disappeared completely after the rescue operation. Intelligence assets in the region report that he's no longer operating in Helmand Province, might have crossed into Pakistan, might have been eliminated by rival Taliban factions, might have been recalled by whoever was supporting his operations."